What up everyone, Shark here. Welcome back to the channel. Today, Slytherin and Steel Balalaika published their Broken Arrow roadmap, highlighting everything they want to add to the game through early 2027. What I have got for you is a TLDR of the roadmap. I'm going to try to condense an hour and 15 long video into whatever this ends up being. So we're going to talk about the roadmap itself. We're going to summarize the Q&A session they did on the back end. We're going to talk about the things they missed or didn't include. And then I'm going to end with a few takeaways of my own. Because of the nature of this video, it's going to be in kind of a podcasty format. So feel free to just kind of put this on in the background as you go about your day if you want a summary of the roadmap and some nice hot takes from your favorite shark. So without any further ado, let's get to it. All right, starting out here with major features. So these are, I'm going to start with the ones that are in progress, and these are signified on the graphic here by the little yellow circle. So the only one they promised this year before Christmas is the introduction of allied AI bots for skirmish. This will allow you to essentially run a 5v5 skirmish with all other AI, either on your team or the enemy. It's something people have been asking for a while, and it'll improve accessibility for the player base, especially for new players that want a chance playing against bots before they get up against the real people. Next, coming next year, save game implementation. Again, something the community's been asking for a long time, but it makes sense. This is a major structural uplift within the software if the software wasn't built for it, which it doesn't seem like it was. There are some other interesting pieces to this that make it difficult. For example, like if you try to save and a unit is shooting, like how do you count the munition that is in the air when the game is in a save state? That's, just one example of a bunch of the tricky technical problems that need to be solved. So they're working through that right now. They are looking at additional shifts to server-side authentication for multiplayer. This is better across the board for pretty much everything. It helps with cheating. It helps with server sync. It helps with consistent gameplay. It allows for things like replays and spectator mode. What it is not good for is lag and optimization. And it seems like the devs made the choice early to focus on reducing lag. What this is going to really require them to do is have server farms globally, and the server farm location will also have to be part of the matchmaking calculation. So I expect the implementation of this to be a little bit rocky, but good in the long term. And then the last major feature that they're working on is replays, which we've talked about before. This is actually really complicated to implement if you didn't build the game for replays from the get-go. So I'm glad that they're prioritizing it. It is critical for all sorts of, for content, for tournaments, checking to see if someone cheated, for reviewing your own play. It's a critical component of multiplayer games, and the fact that they didn't include it from the beginning is a pretty major oversight, so I'm glad that they are focusing on this now. Next, for the major features that are planned, again for 2026, new multiplayer map variants. I think this is important because we'll talk about it later. One of the ways that they want to encourage other game modes is primarily through custom games. And having good variants of the multiplayer maps is really the only way to implement this. So looking forward to that. They are adding loitering munitions to the game. So these are like a combination of cruise missiles and drones. It is cool to see weapons that are currently being used in the front lines globally being incorporated into the game. It says a lot about the long-term future of the game. It creates opportunities for different kind of units. So I'm excited to see that get dropped into the game. I think that's nice. The co-op campaign, I'm actually really pumped about this. One of my favorite things about Wargame European Escalation was the co-op campaign and playing that with a buddy. I would love to see Broken Arrow bring that back, and I think in a lot of ways that would encourage more new players just because of the accessibility of doing co-op. And then a spectator mode. I think based on my understanding of programming, spectator mode should be easier to implement than replays, but it sounds like they're focused more on the replay side of things. That doesn't bother me as long as the spectator mode is in the works. All right, now content, which a lot of people have been asking for from the very beginning. Something that has made this game exciting is the breadth of units and capabilities that are kind of on display here. So 3 new specializations are planned for release in 2026. The first one of which is going to be free at launch. So this is a US allied specialization. I think functionally everyone knows this is some sort of NATO spec. It remains to be seen if they're going to pick a specific country or just have a generic NATO spec within the US faction. For now, I'm assuming down the road, they'll want to build that out and add additional countries to the game. Then we're going to get a new Russian spec and then a new USA spec. This is probably the Navy, just based on some of the graphics and some of the other units that already exist in the game. They said they're also going to add some additional Russian units. I think that's a reference to the addition of the CRAM in 1.0.11. So they're going to continue to sprinkle in additional units as it makes sense. And then looking into 2027, this is when we're going to see the 4th new spec DLC, a Russia allied spec. So maybe DPRK, current events based, who knows? But the big one for 2027 is going to be a new faction. So a new campaign with deck customization, new biome and theater of war. They hinted that it might involve quite a bit of water, which would also suit the US Navy spec in 2026. Lots of new maps. That new faction, you can imagine they're basically going to have to make 5 or 6 specs for that 3rd faction, which we all know is probably China. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of model development and balance and play testing that they have to do before that releases. I know 2027 feels like a long way away, but it is functionally 2026 right now. So I'm not as worried about that, especially with them continuing to sprinkle in new content, what appears every few months, and continuing to make kind of the feature and quality of life improvements as we go. But so good signs from the content perspective. Again, probably not as rapid as people want, but they do have a plan for it, and they have several of these items already in progress. All right, next, I'm just going to quickly run through the planned quality of life improvements. They do plan on making a bunch of updates to the victory screen, allowing additional chat, allowing you to go back and look at your match history, allowing you to report enemy players from the victory screen. So this should help kind of counter cheating in that you can actually go and look and see what after the game, like, oh, how did this guy manage to do all these things that he was doing? And then you start to realize, like, oh, he was actually using a bunch of really cheap units, or he had a lot of recce out, whatever it might be. And then you can make informed reportings of players, which will then improve the efficacy on the dev side. They said their goal is to have 0 innocent players get banned for cheating. I know most of us would rather they just catch all the cheaters in the first place, but it is what it is. They have a bunch of changes to improve communication, so improve marker system, improve chat expansion during the preparation phase, during the match result phase. So the goal there is to make it easier to communicate with your team, especially when you're solo queuing or playing with some randoms. They want to expand battle chatter for better situational awareness. I've talked about this in the past. The audio cues in this game aren't great. So unless you are Demo, the Deaf Wunderkind, that battle chatter is really important to helping you understand what's happening and allowing you especially to play wide across the map and support your teammates. Right now, without those audio cues, you are kind of siloed into one lane. The other big things here are line of sight tool rework alongside a weapon range visualization. So they want to make that line of sight tool a little bit more helpful to the player to help you understand what you should be able to see, where you should be able to shoot, etc. And then mini map improvements, and this goes along the line of the battle chatter, making it easier to understand what is happening on the field from the mini map to improve your broader situational awareness and help you manage a larger portion of the map. At the end of the roadmap review, they took questions from Discord for about 45 minutes, and I'm not going to review every single one of these questions because they aren't all relevant in my opinion, but I'm going to hit a few of the bigger ones that get after things that you would have thought would have been addressed in the roadmap but weren't directly addressed until the team was asked about it. So first and foremost, additional game modes, whether 1v1, 3v3, etc. You can tell the devs are reticent to add additional game modes and potentially split the player base. They said that if they did, they think that 3v3 is probably their preferred. But their primary argument is that the game was designed to work with 5v5. The maps are designed to work with 5v5, and 5v5 is less punishing to newer players because with that number of players on the field, if you have a bad game, your team can still conceivably win. As the player count shrinks, that becomes less and less the case. And that's true. And I kind of disagree with them slightly. I would rather see more skill expression, and you see that more with fewer players on the field. I would prefer to see the option. It might be something like how CS does it, where you have to achieve a certain amount of experience in the game before you can unlock the premier game mode or the competitive matchmaking mode. And so maybe it forces you to play 5v5 only until you reach level 10 or 15 and then opens up other game modes. But I do agree that with the player base in its current state, it's probably not a great idea to add a bunch of additional game modes and split that already relatively small player base. The obvious counter argument to this is that if you had other game modes, you might entice more players to come to the game, players that prefer the smaller game modes like 1v1 or 3v3. I think you see this in something like Company of Heroes 3, which has a player base around the same size, about 4,000 people on at any given time playing multiplayer, but it has 4 different game modes, right? 1v1s through 4v4s. And so not, all 4,000 people are queuing 1v1s, but there's still enough of a player base that you can match make unless you're Havoc and you're at the very top of the leaderboard. You don't have to wait super long for a game. Right now in Broken Arrow, though, if you're above 2000 elo, you gotta wait a couple of minutes for a match to get found, and that can be frustrating. That'll get worse if there are now multiple competitive game modes in Broken Arrow. The devs were asked about balance, and I think what we can expect is a deliberate approach to game balance. They did say that they consider balance to never be complete, which is a good point of view here. Their goal is to balance things in a way that reduce player frustration. They did mention that every time they introduce a balance patch, they do get a bunch of negative feedback about players having to change their decks or a playstyle that they liked no longer working. I am not super sympathetic to those complaints, but I do understand where they're coming from. I think part of the problem with this game is because of the wide array of cool military technology and units in the game, there's a degree of role playing that happens at a lot of different elo levels. And so I think, in my opinion, the goal of balance on top of what they're highlighting and trying to keep the win rate as close to 50-50 as possible should be to make as many units and playstyles viable as possible. So I think that's what they're going to work towards, but they are going to take their time with it. I don't think we're going to see constant balance updates. I think it's just going to be a slow drumbeat, probably alongside the release of additional content or new features. Along those lines, one of the questions they fielded had to do with an unranked mode. And basically, this is not going to happen for a whole host of reasons. I think a lot of people, when they want unranked gameplay, they just want a match that's not sweaty. And basically, they want a match where they are up against people that are either lower elo, lower skill than them, or aren't going to try super hard. You can arrange this, and this was the argument, you can arrange this via custom matches, and that's fine. But if you want to use an automated matchmaking system, you still need an elo rating so that the games are reasonably close and interesting. The goal of the elo rating is to help people find competitive, interesting games. And so I don't think an unranked matchmaking mode outside of custom games is going to be produced just because they don't see that as valuable. Along those lines, they push back quite a bit on kind of the perception that they have within the community of elo being the goal. And I admit, I'm guilty of this too. As I play, I want to watch my elo go up, and mainly that's driven because I think I'm a better player than my elo currently tells me that I am. But the advice that I give other people and that I try to tell myself constantly is don't worry about elo. Play the game to have fun. Try different spec combinations, try different unit combinations. You might lose, right? If your elo is pretty high and you're trying something really off meta, you might get punished for it, but you can still have fun with the game, trying new and wacky things. Me and some of my friends have played some in-house games, and that's an opportunity to test new unit and spec combinations. And that has been more fun, despite the fact that it's still frustrating because those players are as good or better than me. And so I'm still getting tested even when I'm playing with something that's a not meta or suboptimal deck. But just, some food for thought there. All right, and the last thing I want to hit from the Q&A were questions about modding support. And what they basically explained is that the modding tools that are available are pretty powerful. And I'm not a modder myself, but from the folks, especially at barmery.net that I've talked to who do a lot of the modding, they tend to agree. The scenario editor, the modding tools are pretty potent. The devs are concerned that if they made them any more powerful, they'd have even bigger issues with cheating. But they also mentioned that the zombie mode was actually derived from a modder's build attempting to do a zombie mode and got support from the devs. I will say they have been really responsive, even to me as like a small-time content creator. They've helped me out with a couple of things. So if you are really into the modding and that you've got something you're trying, I would bring it up with the devs, believe it or not, and see if there's a, kind of a way to implement. You might be surprised by their response. All right, now we're at the fun part, what they didn't talk about or what they missed from this roadmap. And I want to caveat this by saying that they didn't really get into the tiny technical details. They didn't really talk much about balance. Like you'll actually see there's no mention of balance across the roadmap. And so I don't expect them to get into the kind of the nitnoid details of little changes they want to make. So I am not going to get into those details. The other thing that they didn't really provide were hard dates for any of this. You can see it's 2025, 2026, 2027. And I think because they're a small team, they don't want to set those hard expectations, which as a player can be frustrating, but I'm trying to be understanding here from their point of view and kind of look on the bright side of everything. The first thing I want to highlight, because of some of the things like loitering munitions that they said they're going to add, I am missing the implementation of any sort of like engineering, field repairs, fortifications, mines. I think that would go along the same vein as loitering munitions and kind of incorporating real world tactics into the game. It might make the game slower and campier, which is something they've worked to dissuade. So that might be why they didn't mention it, but just something I noticed. They did not talk at all about splitting ELO by faction. The longer this goes on, the more I think this would be a really elegant solution to some of the win rate disparity between the two different factions. They didn't mention that at all. Remains to be seen if that's an option that they undertake. No change to infantry and vehicle kind of damage suppression mechanics. So for those of you who haven't been chatting about this with me for the last couple months, infantry, when their transport is destroyed, there is a slight amount of overkill damage that they take, but it's not much, and they do not receive any sort of suppression. So sometimes this can result in some frustrating mechanics where you finally get in, kill a vehicle, and now your anti-vehicle squad is dealing with the 14 angry infantry that just pop out unharmed from that vehicle, and it can cause some really kind of weird engagement. So I will say, and I know some other people agree with me, but my kind of opinion here is that there should be suppression applied to the infantry. Not a ton of additional damage, because that is too punishing of a mechanic, but some sort of suppression so infantry from a destroyed transport don't immediately pop out of the vehicle and win whatever engagement they're in, but it gives them the opportunity to use smoke and try to break contact, recover before continuing the engagement. And then the last thing that they did highlight was that they're going to provide an additional update as part of a larger Slytherin campaign update on 9 December, and that will include additional content previews, screenshots, unit overviews, etc. So look forward to that in the second week of December. All right, I want to round out this TLDR with some of my takeaways. And first and foremost, I know there are some people that were frustrated by things that they wanted to see included or by the length of time that it has taken. And my goal with this channel has been to focus on things that help people get better, things that help the game get better, and ways to celebrate kind of the talent that we see in this community, whether it's through the way certain people play the game or whether it's how the game is built. And so I'm going to stick with that and try to be positive kind of across the board here. I think that what this roadmap shows is that the devs are committed to this game in the long term, right? If this was a cash grab for them, they would just focus on the new content that they could immediately monetize and sell back to the community. But you see them continuing to work on game features, continuing to work on quality of life improvements, some of which require a ton of rebuilding of code within like the foundations of the game. And that tells me a lot about where they see this game going. I know the player base has diminished quite a bit from launch. That is normal. I don't know if it's as normal as they sold it during the Q&A, but that's a normal thing, and games will stabilize. There is a world out there where the player base for this game picks up considerably, whether it's through the drumbeat of additional specializations, the improvement in Steam reviews, whatever it might be. But I will say, I appreciate the gameplay, the intellectual property, the thought process that went into building this game. There's a reason I spent so much time on it. And so it is, I like seeing that the devs are as committed to the game's success as the player base is to making the game perfect. The irony here is that I feel like the devs were essentially unprepared for the game's success. They mentioned multiple times how they're a small team. They expected certain things to be true at game launch, and when the game blew up, especially the multiplayer scene, they realized that some of the features they had prioritized early on in the game's development were not the ones that they needed. And so just understanding the difficulty in that process, I'm a little bit more inclined to give the developers some time. When you look at RTSs as a whole, they're almost entirely reliant on single player or player like comp stomp player versus computer game modes for the preponderance of the player base. I think someone from Relic said that like 90% of Company of Heroes players never touch multiplayer. And so you can see how a developer would focus on building this cool campaign and the scenario editor thinking that the primary use case for the game is going to be PvE, and then suddenly the multiplayer community is huge and everyone's demanding new content and changes to balance and game mechanics, and this tiny dev team was just functionally unprepared for it. Especially if you really want to get into the weeds of this, the software industry's crunch mentality, like, hey, we said we're going to launch the game by this time, and so let's slam everyone working 20 hours a day to make sure that we get it out on time and have a successful launch, only to have a game that's more successful than you ever imagined. And now instead of getting to like pop the champagne and celebrate, everyone's back at work trying to not only make sure that, you know, bugs and server stuff are taken care of, but now like, what do we do next? We need to make good on all of these promises, and the promises that the game itself through its existence and implementation makes to the player base. So I kind of understand where the devs are coming from with some of their thoughts and like the timeline that they give here. I wish it was faster. You know, I enjoy this game, and all of my criticism comes from a place of love. The last thing that I want to kind of throw out there, if you're frustrated with certain parts of the game, I recommend that you not review bomb this game on Steam. And here's why. It's one thing, like, I know it feels cathartic to express your frustration with the path of the game or some things that happen in the game. And like Reddit is there for that, right? As Lima would say, there's a lot of whinging that goes on in Reddit spaces, but that can be your source of catharsis, I think. When you review the game on Steam and you, let's say, we'll call it an honest review, but maybe embellished, right? And you get too far into the negative territory. There are a lot of people out there that, you know, and I see them in the comments section on YouTube. They come and they're like, hey, I've been thinking about getting this game, but the Steam reviews are really bad. What do you think? Man, if you want all of these features to come in, if you want the devs to have the time and space and resources to work on this stuff faster, the best way to go about that is by expanding the player base. And I know I'm rambling here a little bit. I don't want to sound like a shill for the devs. Lord knows that I was frustrated. If you ask my wife, I came home today from work after listening to this on the drive home, this Q&A, and I was super frustrated too with some of the struggles the devs had faced in getting the game that they released to be the game that they want. And I think like that's the problem that we're all facing right now is we are here in the game Broken Arrow in whatever perfected form that we have for it is over here somewhere. And we all want to get to this point. By the way, that point is not the same for everybody, which makes this extra fun. But we all disagree slightly on the route. And if there's any takeaway from this at all, it's that there is a roadmap. Like, there is a plan. The devs have a strategy. Whether you agree with the strategy, it is kind of irrelevant unless you're one of their like shareholders, right? But there is a strategy, there is a plan, and the devs are invested in the game. And so above all, that's what I'm taking away from this roadmap. Hopefully this was useful and summarized, you know, an hour and 15-minute video into something a little bit more digestible. Let me know what you guys think. I appreciate all the time and effort you guys put into your comments. Some of the comments recently have been really, really well thought out and put together and made me challenge a lot of my own assumptions and takes on the game. So I do really want to hear what you think. Big shout out to everyone in Dressel's Discord who I play with that chatted with me about this while I was in the gym today. And shout out to my wife for listening to me whinge about this video for a solid hour this evening. But hopefully this is helpful. That's going to do it for us here, and we will see y'all in the next one.